Okay, we are recording.
Hello, y'all, and welcome to the third episode of Real and Unrehearsed. I am Wallyce Todd, the Executive Director of Community CPR, and I am talking with Francis, who is a board member of Community CPR, but is also the founder of Healing Your Almond, and she's going to tell you more about that. And we're here today because we want to have an ongoing conversation about emotions, mental health, and today specifically about grief and how this pandemic is causing inward emotions and processing that some people may not be familiar with or comfortable with. And we wanted just to have a short conversation to normalize some of the things that we're feeling. So Francis, tell us a bit about your background.
My name is Francis. I'm the founder of Healing Your Almond. Also, I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor, as well as a certified trauma practitioner with it's actually a little over a decade of experience at this point in the mental health field. Healing Your Almond is a business-to-business organization, so we provide trauma training to organizations. We've done a lunch and learn with Community CPR just to and other community partners, just to kind of give people an idea of what that is. We do workforce development training, so we'll train people in things like emotional intelligence. We do all kinds of different things. We consult. There's some businesses, especially right now, that are struggling of how to handle certain things. Lots of different things are happening in communities that are, impacting businesses. Because I am a licensed clinician, I'm bound by confidentiality. So what I've learned is that makes businesses feel a lot more comfortable working with me because they know that, not just because I say I'm not going to tell anybody, I actually cannot tell anybody once we've entered into a contractual relationship. So it's been interesting being a business owner in this time. But typically a lot of people call on me to do things like this, to do, podcast or YouTube channels or things like that, just to kind of talk about mental health and the different things that occur.
So let's talk about that. Let's jump right in. The topic we were going to discuss today is grief. And I think that a lot of people associate initially grief with being the loss of a loved one, a family member, a pet, or grieving some, what they might have previously considered major life event. And what we wanted to discuss today is how grief comes into this pandemic response, in that there are missed events, graduations, weddings, funerals, other things, and people may be literally grieving that, but not knowing exactly what to do with that grief or even acknowledging that it's valid. So let's talk about that. What do you think is significant when it comes to the way brain science works and the way your emotions and feelings are about this pandemic affecting limited social gatherings, other things that are missing? Give us some details about what you perceive and some maybe professional thoughts about how people can respond to this sense of loss that they're having.
Well, one of the things I want to point out that you said earlier, because we've been talking about this for about a week now, we talk a lot, y'all. Sometimes we have little 5-second conversations and then we get into hour-long conversations. But one of the things that Wallyce said that I really loved is she said, it's very easy to say other people have it worse. So for example, I've talked to mothers who are now working from home. They're still fully employed, but they're working from home and they're also caretaking their kids. And they're used to having some space and some routine, and they feel like all that is gone. And then they talk to me and they're like, well, I don't even feel comfortable saying that because some people have lost their jobs. And some people don't have the ability to provide education at home because of internet or, whatever. And the thing I want to say is be careful saying that to other people. Please don't. But then also don't say it to yourself. Don't discredit your own grieving and your own mourning and your own loss. And that doesn't always have to be someone dying. That is a very clear example. But also the ending of a work relationship, the ending of, a college career, because that is something to celebrate. So you get to celebrate it, but then you don't get to celebrate it because you can't have these big graduation parties like you would normally have, or these big ceremonies. But also it's the ending of something.
Yes.
And I think that it's important to the first thing I want to encourage everybody to do is please give yourself some grace and some space.
Like that, let's pause. Grace and space, because you know that grace is big in my world, but when you say space, you oftentimes hear people talking about, I'm holding space for that. That doesn't mean that it's going to go overnight and be better, but you're saying grace and space is, I think, an excellent concept and theme as we talk about grief, that it doesn't happen in all one time frame and it's not always linear. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was actually in prep for this. I happened to come across a 8-minute podcast on LinkedIn, And I was listening to the individual, and she's very intelligent, very articulate, but she's not a mental health specialist. And I worry sometimes about people kind of talking about things that are a little outside of their field. So, for example, you'd share that you're technically a reverend, and when people come to me with different religious concerns, I'm quick to say, okay, what is your faith, and can we find somebody that knows that faith? Because I don't, and not in the same way that a leader of that faith would know, because you have training and you have education around the Bible and around verses, all these things that I don't know. So I think it's really important to kind of stay in your lane. And one of the things she said was, is moving through the stages of grief. The stages of grief is actually the stages of death and dying, and it's for the person that has a terminal illness. The rest of us go through things a lot differently, and we don't go through a stage and then another stage and another stage and another stage, and we get to acceptance and all is well. That is not the way it works. It's more like, imagine a roller coaster that never really seems to have a beginning or an end. That's really more like what grief and mourning looks like. And that is true for grief and mourning of events, as well as things that you feel like you should have gotten to experience. I mean, major life events are not being honored right now in the way we're used to.
Yes, in the way that we're used to. You're right. Now, I do believe there's value that every person's experiences matter. So just because I am Reverend Wallyce Todd doesn't mean that I'm an expert in all things biblical or theological, but I do appreciate what you're saying is that we want to be aware of checking our sources. And I think that that is something that people are grieving now, even as they go on to social media. I don't know about you, but I'm grieving the division that I see during this pandemic with people that are sometimes not checking their sources or not going to and making sure that the information that they're absorbing or the information that they're putting out is accurate or from a person who has stayed in their lane. And the reason I bring that up is there's grief that we might not need to be experiencing. You know, there's some things that if we were checking our sources and making sure could help us to process it differently. So you're right, this pandemic has opened up all these layers of different types of grief. And it's not something that's just isolated into, as you mentioned, a person having a terminal disease and they're going through it. I totally agree with you about the time frame of grief. My father passed away in 2014, and just this weekend, I found in a box that I was sorting through the program from his memorial services, and tears just streamed. But then I shut them back down because I had to do something else. But I was surprised that it came up so fast. But in this pandemic, I have wanted a hug from my dad. I have wanted to go to him and have advice. So even though I've missed him all my years since 2014, there's even a different kind of missing him during this pandemic because he was wise and he had experienced life traumas and he would have had insight. So that's been interesting to experience as well, because I sometimes have thought intellectually that I've grieved. Okay, I'm done now, you know, or I'm very sad that we didn't get to have my big family reunion at the 4th of July. That's something our family does. And so intellectually, I think I've dealt with it, and then something will come up and the emotions will well up and it doesn't fit in a tidy little box.
Well, and I think that's a really good point of intellectually. So Wallyce knows I'm like obsessed with brain science. And one of the things in terms of trauma, I'm obsessed with brain science. And one of the things is there's different levels of the brain. So there's that kind of initial level, I'll just go through it real quick, that controls breathing and automated things, all the things, eyes blinking, all the things that happen basically when you're asleep that you don't have to think of. And then the second level is your safety brain. In any kind of trauma or any time you've been made to feel powerless and or unsafe, that's where all those injuries live. And then there's your cognitive brain. And I think we as humans, because we're capable of these complex thoughts, we can go to the moon, we can fly planes, we can create vaccines, we can do all these really fancy things that we think that we can kind of think our way in of or out of anything, and that we can check a box and say, okay, we went to the funeral, we cried, we had a breakdown, we talked to the family members, we got mad and maybe we threw something, we prayed about it, we're done. You know, we're good. We've been there. We went to that trip. We got the stamp. We're done. And the thing is, it doesn't work like that. I'm so sorry to report. Grieving comes and goes, very much like the ocean. And sometimes it's low tide and high tide. And sometimes the waves are big and completely unexpected. And other times you feel like, oh, I'm okay. And you can be okay for like months, you know, and you really are sincerely okay. But then something happens, and it can be a life event like a pandemic. combined with something that made you think of them. And oftentimes it's not so much a cognitive experience, it's actually a physical experience of the crying and of the being upset and the things like that. And the key that I really want to kind of drive home to everybody is let that happen. Create space for yourself to let that happen. Yeah. So if you have the, it's really up to you about how you do it. I tell people all the time that there's a difference between grieving and mourning. So grieving is something that happens internally within you. So typically, like, a lot of my clients will be like, I just went and took a shower and cried. And I'm like, okay, I'm fine with that. As long as you weren't in the shower all day, that's good. And then other people will say, I have another friend of mine who's also a neighbor. She's doing weekly Bible study on Zoom. And she has found so much peace and solace in that, in terms of just kind of finding shelter in the Lord, but then also finding that community that is very personal to her, because we're losing our community. For me, one of the ways I deal with things is I go out with a couple friends and we hang out. It's usually 2 or 3 people max, but we're at a restaurant, so we're around a lot of people. And we're having really good food and we're just talking and just allowing ourselves to kind of say and do whatever we want. It's not the same doing it in Zoom, but it's important to still try to figure out a way to do it than to just skip it completely, because that takes away from the mourning part of it. And we don't get to mourn the graduation or the person dying or wedding or baby shower or all these kind of huge events. It's a big deal.
I want to ask you something, because I've actually not heard that delineation, and I probably should have. So let me go back. You said, for you, as you understand, grieving is the internal and it's mourning the external that you're doing with others, or how would you?
Yes, mourning is what you do with other people.
And that's what, look, now see, that shows you. As someone who studied the Bible and has a master's degree, one of the scriptures in the Bible, in the holy text that I follow, it says, mourn with those who mourn. But until just now, I didn't delineate that as much. So there's a difference, because when you're talking, and in that framework of the Bible, it was a Hebraic thing where they did mourn. There was a whole process of mourning. I think that happens. Some of your background is Native American, and there is a Native American heritage that includes how you mourn with others, right?
Absolutely.
But what you're saying is grieving is that internal process, and mourning is what we do in community. Am I hearing that? It might not be quite that black and white or separate. But
no, it actually is. It actually is. And both, the main thing is both need to occur. I think a lot of us are inclined to kind of go one side or the other. I'm very much into grieving. Like, I want to do my own process. I want to cry till I can't breathe anymore. I want to pray. I want to do all the things I need to do. I want to, the ugly cry. I want to really just dive in. I do a good job of doing that by myself, because I know that if I don't, it's going to come out later. And in my job, that's something I can't afford. I can't afford to be upset about something that happened in my past in session or in a whole training with a whole organization.
Right.
That's just not something that can happen for me. So I'm like, all right, let me figure out space and grace for myself to handle this. And I do pretty good with that. Where I struggle is allowing myself to also experience emotions with others. Now, I'll do that if I'm doing it to help somebody. So, right, like if I want to teach somebody it's okay to be vulnerable, I will plan a whole event and be vulnerable. But in terms of allowing myself to mourn something with a group of people, even if it's just my family, that's an area that I struggle in. So what I'm encouraging anybody listening this to do is to think about the things that you have not gotten to experience because of this pandemic. Allow yourself the grace and the space to be upset about it internally by yourself. And then also share those emotions with maybe 1 or 2 people, a trusted, whether it be family members, a religious leader, whoever, to kind of allow yourself, because what I've noticed is, like, sometimes somebody will say, how are you? And everybody wants to hear, I'm fine. I don't say that. If I'm not fine, I'm going to tell you I'm not fine. And what I've learned is that half the time the person will say, yeah, me either.
Amen. Do you know, and that you have just, when I lived in Slovakia, I will always remember the lesson that my Slovak friends taught me, because there was a phrase that was ako samash that we learned early on, because I asked them, how do you say in Slovak, how are you? Because growing up in the South, exactly what you say. We would go, how are you? And the standard answer is, I'm fine, or I'm well, or I'm too blessed to be stressed, or I'm great, how are you? And it's authentic. If it's true, do it, if that's how you are. But what I hear you saying, and what my Slovak friends tell me too, is they're like, you say it and keep walking. You don't listen to my answer. You might be great, but what if I'm not great? And you didn't give me a moment to that space. You didn't give me space to tell you I'm not so good. I'm not, like, I'm really stressed. I'm grieving that I didn't get to go to my child's graduation if we were putting it in the context of the pandemic right now. Or I grieve that I can't go have my girl time. I can't go to a restaurant in the same way that I could before and talk with friends and experience and decompress. Those are things that are valid to grieve. And if you don't give space for them and you're just giving the happy face, which is Southern, I'm just going to say it's Southern, and I think it's in other cultures as well, but it's something that you want, I think, what we're trying to say is, y'all, we want to observe, and we don't want to criticize and condemn, but we want to give space to be real, to pause, to be in the moment, to listen. And, one of the challenges I think all of us have, well, you might not have it, Franchon, but I think I and others often are listening to respond instead of just listening to understand. And so if we if someone's grieving and it's parents that couldn't go to a child's event, or work relationships that are not there, or the loss of a job, or the stress of finances, or whatever, and we just say, hey, how are you? And then we keep going, or I'm using that even symbolically, if we don't give space to hear, to understand, but just rather to respond, then I think we're going to contribute to other mental health issues. Would you agree? Because people are stuck in their emotions and they're not talking about them. And what do you think?
Well, I think we're definitely going to contribute to more mental health issues, but also we're missing an opportunity for connection.
Yeah.
So if I'm at the grocery store and someone says, how are you? And I say, you know what, I'm just sad because my mom graduated, and this is a true story, graduated via internet, and she even did like the cap and gown thing and dressed up. She looked really nice. My grandma took pictures of her. My grandma sent the pictures to me. And it was really, it's better than nothing, right? And I'm still grateful. But my mom has worked so hard for that degree, and any other circumstances, I would have been in New York present watching her, so I didn't really get to participate virtual because I wasn't really a thing. But then also, I didn't even get to go to New York and celebrate with just my family, just my couple family members, because of all the implications for me when I got back in terms of quarantine and all those kind of things. So if I say the simple sentence to the woman in Food Line, like, I'm really sad I missed my mom's graduation, she may be really sad that she missed her daughter's graduation, or she may be really sad that she missed something. So now an opportunity for true, sincere, in-person connection without violating any of the rules, right? We're still wearing our masks, we're still social distancing, all those things. But now we know that we're not alone, even if it's only for a couple minutes, in that experience is very healing.
Yes.
So that may make it so that later on, I don't need to go to therapy about it because I know I'm not alone in it.
Yeah. And let's speak to that healing, and let's speak to resiliency, and let's speak to even the name of your organization with a little more clarity. When you say Healing Your Almond, we talked about it in episode 1 and 2, but let's do a quick review. That you use the almond shape and in your logo to be symbolic of
the amygdala.
Okay.
So the amygdala is the size and the shape of an almond, and it is in your brain, and it's that safety. I like to call it your fire alarm. So it's like your ADT, state-of-the-art system. And when something goes wrong, when you are unsafe, your amygdala, which I like to call your almond because it's a much less intimidating word, your almond or your amygdala goes off like a fire system.
Yeah.
And what happens is one of the things that leads to resilience is connection.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we cannot connect over Zoom. I'm definitely not saying that. I've been doing therapy over Zoom since March. And for a lot of my clients, it's been a blessing, and I'm happy that I'm able to provide it, and they're happy that they can get it. However, I will say the healing is not the same, and the connection is not the same. And I think it's okay to say that. I think some of us, especially on the clinician side of things, we've been a little afraid to say that. But I'll say it publicly. I love Zoom. I like the convenience. I like being in the safety of my own home. I like not stressing out every single day that I may have gotten something or given, God forbid, given something to someone. Like, there's advantages. But that connection and that healing, we are social creatures, and we are not really designed to connect through technology. And ultimately, there's a lot of issues that it's causing. Like I said, better something than nothing for sure. However, at the same time, I think it's important that we acknowledge that resilience that you're talking about comes from interacting with other people you feel safe with. So for example, two of my friends were like, listen, we're coming. We don't care. We're coming. And I'm like, okay, you guys want to come. So they came and spent 2-3 days here, and it was something that I needed because somebody in my life did pass away in April, and we didn't get to do a funeral. We didn't get to do all the things. We didn't, his family's not very technology savvy. So it's not like, I know some families are streaming memorial services and things like that and really come up with creative ways, which I think is amazing. His family didn't get the opportunity to do that, which is fine. But for me, what that meant was I didn't allow myself grieving because I was afraid. Because I was like, if I start crying, I'm not going to stop. That's really how I honestly felt. And then I didn't allow mourning because I didn't really tell anybody, and I didn't know what to do about it or how to even, I can call up a friend and say, hey, so-and-so died. And what does that mean, right? So how are we going to do something about it? Because normally people would come to my house, we bring food, we do all these things. So a lot of our traditions, we go to church, we do all these things that we can't do right now. So I think it's just really important to know that connection with a trusted, safe person, even if it's just one person, even if it's in a parking lot or at a park, or, you're not hugging, but you're talking, that builds resilience so that you can handle the grief and mourning that you're going through now. But then also your brain starts to learn the routine for the next time.
Amen. And because I want us to say that while we're wanting to validate our emotions and we're wanting for us to give the space and grace, that we also want to be real and authentic in saying there's hope for healing. You need to, we say need, you and I would invite and encourage people to feel their feelings, have the grace and space for their feelings, but to also know that there's hope, that those feelings don't have to impact every behavior, and their feelings can get to a place where there's healing, not only in their feelings because time and processing has happened, but their brain can also heal. You don't have to have, because grief, as you say, it can rewire you. Your trauma can literally rewire your synapses fired, all of those things that you would speak to. And that's why your organization would say healing your almond is a hope, because you don't have to live in the idea that it will never be healthier for you, or it will never be better, or that this will always be a hurt. Would you agree? I'm not, but I'm saying I have had to recognize there's things in my life that I think I've just accepted, Francine, are always going to be that way. And then for me, the Lord's like, no, we can have some healing. You don't have to wait till heaven for that to get better. There can be this connection that you're talking about. But what I'm hearing you say too is that this connection part is so significant. And I want to end, as we get kind of to the close of this particular episode, to reiterate what you're saying is people finding not only the technology connections, but other healthy ways to connect. Francine, I got to be honest with you. Though I talk a lot, people think that I'm just totally extroverted. And in my case, if you take a personality profile, the Myers-Briggs, my introvert was almost as high as my extrovert. I'm just very talkative. So I can be for a while on my own, and it's very healthy. The solitude is good. But there's a difference in me choosing to be on my own and being almost forced to be on my own. So I have had introverted friends and professionals who are like, usually I love to be working from home, and usually I love to be by myself, and people are really annoying. But then when you have month after month of it being forced, that you can't have the interactions you choose. You can't have the large group connections. You can't have, it is building up, it's accumulating in people, I think. And in some ways, if we're not careful, it's going to, it will rewire us in ways that may not be healthy if we don't address. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. I think the connection part and the isolation is a huge issue. And that's why we have to make sure, yes, by all means, connect through Zoom. I love technology, or whatever platform you use is completely fine, and figure out a way to do that. Also, figure out a way to go to the park, to go to a parking lot, to go for a walk, to do things with one person and social distance. There's still a way to do this stuff safely. And I think sometimes if you get too caught up, I don't know about you, but my feed is always like wearing a mask and social distance and all the people that aren't doing the things appropriately and all these kind of things. And then the people are saying it's not a big deal. We don't need to be doing it. It's these constant messaging that kind of makes me kind of forget my own education and what's best for me. And what's best for me is I need to leave the house every couple of days and have contact with somebody, even if that means we're wearing a mask, we're socially distancing, but we're still talking to each other and seeing each other. That's what I have to do for my own for my sanity and my safety, that's what needs to happen for me. So I think it's important to give people permission to do that. As the mental health specialist in the room, I'm giving you permission to safely make sure that you go whatever time frame works out for you. Maybe for you, it's once a day. I love my solitude. I love my home. I have my little fur baby. I really enjoy being home. But I know me, and after about 5-6 days of being home and not having actual connection with someone, I start feeling a little crazy. I start feeling alone. I start having all these negative thoughts going on in my head that are not real life. It's just what's going on in my head. So I know that a phone call and a Zoom session, although that's great, is not going to get it. So that's when I have to use my support system and say, hey, can we go to the park? Can we go for a walk? Can we get some food and sit in a parking lot? Like, and everyone's always like, yeah, sure. And the funny thing is those people need that too. And a lot of people have this perception, and I know people have this perception about Wallyce too, that we're so busy that you kind of can't ask us for things. And the thing is, a lot of times they're like, oh, I'm so glad you asked because I wanted to do something, or I needed to get out of the house, or, you know, a lot of us have small front decks or back decks. That's what I've been doing with a lot of my friends. I'll sit on their back deck. And, you know, they're on one side of the deck, I'm on the other side of the deck, and they have their snacks, I have my snacks, and we're just talking.
Yeah, yeah. And so as we conclude this particular session, because we can keep talking in other episodes and build on this. But I think what I hear, if we're having some through lines, it is to understand that it is okay to be grieving, the not experiencing group gatherings, the lack of big events, the changes in your job world, in your children's education scheduling, all of those things. It is okay to feel that. And then while you're feeling it, you can recognize that you can internally grieve, but if you can figure out a way to also healthfully mourn, which is external, so internal grieve, external mourn, and then to also recognize that in talking and communicating, connecting, you're going to find ways to create systems and put in healthy responses to these feelings that are going to keep you from potentially stuffing everything and having even more major problems 6 months from now or a year from now. And we need to emphasize that even those people that think they're really healthy in their mind and in their thoughts can have negative thoughts. There are people that may have never experienced what it would be like to say, I don't want to live anymore. And, you know, they might not want to acknowledge that, oh, my goodness, I've thought about not living anymore, or I shouldn't, you know, if their faith perspective like condemns suicide, they'd be like, oh, I can't think about that. But people may be having some of those experiences of, I don't want to do this anymore. And what we're saying is please then connect with me. And we can put some information in the comments about numbers that you could call, you know, national hotlines and other things. But what I'm saying is people are having those feelings. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're somehow unhealthy. It's real in the sense of when I say unhealthy, it might be an unhealthy thought, but it's not an indictment of you because it's normal to be having those things in this season. This is for this generation, this kind of pandemic, this kind of impact into our business and into our government and into the world hasn't happened in this generation, in this period of time. And so it's still new. People are still trying to figure out things. So grieving and mourning are real and a part of it, but we want to encourage you to connect so that you can stay healthy and that you can put questions in the comments below this. When we put up this episode, Fran, Sean, and I will be checking the comments. So if you have any questions that you want us to maybe address more specifically, or you are curious about where can I get help, or is there some way to connect? Do you have suggestions? We will be looking at those comments and be more than happy in answering them. They might not get answered immediately, but we will answer them. And we also will do other episodes. We're going to speak about trauma some more. We're going to talk about some other things that are happening, but we wanted just today to come to you and say, it's okay. It's real to be having a tough time, to be grieving. It's not being immature to be upset about missing a big event or your family. And what I was going to say and didn't, y'all, I'm truly not as healthy when I don't get hugs. Now, other people might not feel that way because they may not be tactile, so that's okay. But I literally am a healthier and happier person when I get healthy hugs. Now, people can have had experiences that the human touch doesn't feel healthy to them. And we need to be respectful of that space and give that grace and space. But in my life, getting hugged from my mom or getting hugged from Fran or other people, it's literally, I can feel my endorphins really, like it's a healthy thing for me. And I have been months without hugs. I ain't so healthy in that realm. I mean, I am missing hugs. And so in sign language, I want to give one concept. In American Sign Language, for when people are hearing impaired, my father learned sign language and had many friends that had hearing impairment. And so one of the words, the sign in sign language is for love. So if you were saying, I love you, you would go, I love you. And a shorthand for that was this. But let me tell you what I discovered when I was a pastor at a recent funeral, and we had limited people there. They were social distancing, and yes, they were streaming. And I have to be honest, that wasn't comfortable. It wasn't normal tradition, but it was at least helpful so that people could experience and be there with them. But I kind of felt led of the Lord to go, hey, I would normally, Wallyce, the pastor, would normally at the end of the service hug, especially the family members in some form, some form or fashion. And I couldn't do it, Franchon, because of social distancing and safety, healthy. But you know what? Safe, healthy practices. But you know what? The sign for love, if you do that and you kind of squeeze in, that's like a hug. So you're showing to the person, I can't physically hug you, but I'm hugging. I mean, and then you know what? It's kind of a hug to yourself. Right. So you're doing an action where you're saying, if I could, I would hug you. I can't. So but then there's also there's that double message because you're also sharing love. So I started doing it. When I see people, I do this because I can't hug them in person. So there's some strategies that might seem simple, but that's helped me. That's helped my body to do that.
Right.
Because another thing that I want to add is that there's a difference in how people are experiencing this pandemic if they live in a family unit or if they're not in a family unit. And we can talk more about that, Franchon. We might want to make that its own episode about the difference between, you can get hugs from your husband or wife or children if y'all are all in the same house and no one has COVID-19. And so you're all, in your house. But what about the people who don't have that? What about the people who live on their own? What about the veterans? What about the senior citizens? What about those? So one of the ways that we could also be making sure that our neighbors are okay is checking in with them by telephone call, by sending a mail, a letter, doing something so that especially people that don't have support bases right there are remembering that they're also loved. Because I think we're going to find that if we don't do that, we're going to have loved ones that have really negative impact from this pandemic because they won't have had some of that healthy interaction. So we just encourage each other and you that are listening, please do be intentional in the next week or two. Give yourself grace and space. And what I would also encourage, and I think Franchon, to also encourage you to find at least one or two other people, and maybe those people that are in situations where they don't have family around them, and be intentional about somehow connecting with them, because that's going to lessen their mourning and their grief. And it's a win-win. Yes?
Absolutely. And I know I've seen people do, because some people screen doors, like my screen door is not a screen, it's glass. So for people who are elderly or those super high risk people, some people will come and sit on the edge of their porch and they don't even open the door. And they just literally just see each other and they're yelling or they're talking on the phone, but they can actually see each other. We got to get creative. Do whatever you feel, comfortable doing. I love the porch idea. I do that with a lot of my friends. Because, I don't want to go, even restaurants that are open. For my own sanity, I don't want to be there. It actually doesn't help me. But I've really loved the back porch thing, or the car thing. Let's park 2 spaces from each other and we're throwing snacks, and making jokes and doing stuff because we're still connecting, we're still laughing, but you're in your space, I'm in mine. But definitely reaching out to the people, like I said, I disclosed earlier, I live by myself. And the first couple of weeks I was like, I don't know if I can do this, and then I found all these projects to do. So that lasted for another couple of weeks. And then I was like, okay, I got it. Somebody's got to come hang out on my porch. We got to figure something out for my safety and my sanity. But for those who don't feel comfortable reaching out, definitely identify someone and check on them. And it would be really good, for the mom that's home with the kids and the partner and the school and the work and the dishes and the this and the that maybe they would love to go check on their aunt or their uncle or someone who's by themselves and doesn't have anybody. That could be a blessing for both of you.
So thank y'all for joining us. And like I say, if you have any questions, comments, or things that you would like us to talk about differently or more in depth, put them in the comments. We will put some information, because if you're feeling alone, if your thoughts have gotten to where they're dark and shadowy to the point that you're having a hard time processing and clearly feeling any kind of joy, please know that there are people that care and want to respond. And so we'll put some information there for you. And as you are going through, as all of us, going through this pandemic, this unprecedented time, do please give yourself permission to feel your feelings, to process through the grief, not stuff it down, to mourn when you can, and to reach out to people if you need some help, and to if you do decide to go to the grocery store, and if you do decide to ask somebody how they are, maybe take a minute to actually listen, because you might find that, just like Sean said, that connection, that 2-minute connection, will make a world of difference for you and for them. So those are some of our ideas and suggestions. We thank you for watching. We hope you will let us know about how you're doing, and touch base with either Healing Your Almond. It has a website, Community CPR, if there's any way that either one of our organizations can. So thank you so much. God bless you.
No problem. Thank you. You guys have a good night.